Have you ever wondered how a gas pump knows exactly when your tank is full? You squeeze the handle, fuel rushes in, and then, click, it shuts off at precisely the right moment. No overflow, no warning light, no visible sensor inside your car's tank. It feels almost intelligent, like the nozzle somehow knows what's happening deep inside a dark metal container it can't even see. Most people assume there must be an electronic sensor communicating with the pump, but there isn't. In fact, the entire system works without computers, chips, or digital signals of any kind. What actually makes that familiar clicking sound possible is a clever piece of fluid physics hidden inside the nozzle itself, a design so simple and reliable that it has barely changed in decades. To understand why this works the way it does, we have to start at the beginning. When fuel enters the nozzle, it travels through a main pipe toward a closed valve. That valve is spring-loaded, which means it naturally wants to stay shut. When you squeeze the handle, you are not directly forcing fuel through. Instead, you are activating a small mechanical system that opens that valve and allows fuel to flow. But before we even get to the shutoff mechanism, we need to look at something small and easy to miss. A tiny hole near the tip of the nozzle. It is usually located either on the underside or the side of the metal tube. That hole is not decorative. It is the key to everything. Inside the nozzle, there is a narrow tube connected to that small hole. That tube runs all the way back into the body of the handle. It is part of a system based on something called the Venturi effect. To understand the Venturi effect, imagine a wide pipe that suddenly narrows in the middle before widening again. When fluid moves through that narrow section, it has to speed up. The same amount of mass is passing through a tighter space, so it travels faster. Now here is the important part. When the fluid speeds up, its pressure drops. You can think of fluid as having two kinds of energy. One is motion, or kinetic energy. The other is stored as pressure. When the motion increases, the pressure must decrease to keep the total energy balanced. That simple trade-off creates a region of low pressure in the narrow section of the pipe. Inside the gas nozzle, there is a constricted ring where the fuel is forced through a very thin channel. As the fuel rushes through this tight space, its speed increases and its pressure drops. That low-pressure region is connected to the thin tube that leads to the small hole at the tip of the nozzle. Because the pressure in that region is lower than the surrounding air, air gets sucked in through the hole. That air travels through the thin tube and mixes into the fuel flow inside the nozzle. As long as the hole at the tip is exposed to air, this system continues to draw air in. That airflow plays a critical role. Now imagine you are filling your tank. The fuel level rises inside the tank. Eventually, it reaches the end of the nozzle and covers that small hole. At that moment, the tube is no longer sucking in air. Instead, it is trying to suck in liquid fuel. Liquid fuel is much heavier than air. It does not flow as easily through that narrow tube. As a result, the airflow that was relieving the low pressure inside the system is suddenly restricted. And this is where the second half of the mechanism comes in. The thin tube inside the nozzle not only leads to the tip, it also forks. One path goes to the hole at the tip. The other path leads to a small sealed chamber inside the handle. That chamber is covered by a flexible membrane. When air is flowing freely through the tip, the pressure difference inside this chamber remains modest. But when the hole is covered by fuel and airflow is restricted, the pressure inside the chamber drops more dramatically. That drop in pressure pulls on the membrane. The membrane does not need to move much. Even a slight movement is enough, because attached to that membrane is a small rod. That rod connects to a mechanical latch system inside the handle. Now we need to look at the handle itself. When you squeeze the handle, you are creating leverage. Inside the nozzle, there is a clever arrangement of levers and ball bearings. These ball bearings act like temporary locks. When you first squeeze the handle, the internal parts shift, until the bearings jam into a narrow section of the housing. That jamming point becomes the fulcrum for a lever. With that fulcrum in place, the handle can now push against the spring-loaded valve and hold it open. Fuel flows through the nozzle, around the internal housing, through the constricted ring, and out into your tank. As long as the ball bearings remain wedged in position, the valve stays open. But remember the membrane connected to that rod. When the tank fills and the small hole is covered, the pressure drop increases. The membrane gets pulled inward. The rod attached to it moves, and that movement pulls a small wedge-like piece out of position. When that wedge shifts, the ball bearings are no longer supported. They fall inward. Once they fall, the lever system loses its fulcrum. Without that stable pivot point, the internal mechanism collapses. The spring-loaded valve snaps shut instantly. That snapping motion is the click you hear. Fuel stops flowing in a fraction of a second. The handle pops back slightly, and the system resets itself. All of this happens without electricity, without digital sensors, without communication between your car and the pump. It is entirely mechanical. Fuel flows, pressure changes, a membrane moves, bearings drop, a valve closes. Each part is small. Each step is simple. But together they create a reliable safety system that prevents spills and reduces fire risk at fuel stations around the world. What makes this design remarkable is not just that it works, but that it works so consistently. It relies on basic physical principles that do not depend on software updates or electronic calibration. As long as fluid flows and pressure behaves according to physics, the system functions. Even the details are elegant. The constricted ring that creates the low-pressure region is formed by a spring-loaded stopper that shifts under fuel pressure, opening just enough to create a thin circular channel. That narrow channel is what accelerates the fuel and creates the pressure drop needed for the Venturi effect. Tiny holes around that ring connect the low-pressure zone to the internal tubes. The geometry is compact, efficient, purpose-built, and the membrane does not need to travel far. In fact, its movement is subtle, but that slight motion is enough to release the latch mechanism. If you could see inside the nozzle while filling your tank, you would witness a delicate balance of forces constantly at work. Air is being drawn in, pressure adjusting. Springs are pushing back, bearings pressing against metal walls. Then, at just the right moment, the balance shifts. The airflow stops, the pressure difference spikes, the membrane pulls, the bearings fall. Click. The process feels automatic because it is, but not in a digital sense. It is automatic in the way a mechanical watch is automatic, a chain of physical events set into motion by simple laws of nature. And perhaps that is the most interesting part. In a world where nearly every device relies on electronics and sensors, the gas pump nozzle still depends on airflow, pressure, and leverage. It is a reminder that elegant solutions do not always require complexity. The next time you fill your tank and hear that small clicking sound, you will know what just happened inside the handle in your hand. A narrow ring accelerated fuel. Pressure dropped. A tube tried to pull air but found liquid instead. A membrane shifted. A latch released. A spring snapped a valve shut. A quiet piece of fluid physics prevented a dangerous overflow. Thank you for watching. If you have other everyday mechanisms you would like to explore, let me know. And if you enjoy calm, structured explanations like this, consider subscribing. I appreciate you spending your time here, and I will see you at the next one.